Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this debate about Achilles. Was he a hero or just a very naughty boy? We'll find out. You can see we've got our two teams stationed behind us. Look, I'm glad that you're all here celebrating the Festival of Homer. I think that it says something quite important about Melbourne, that we're even able to have a Festival of Homer and make it a success. It's a very cultural and rich in education city that we live in, and with that in mind, I would like to acknowledge that the land we're on today has not always been known as Melbourne, and I'd like to acknowledge the people of the Kulin Nation, who are the traditional owners of this land, and pay my respect to their elders, past and present. Now, to explain more fully the concept of this debate, I'm going to introduce Jeff Richardson, who is a member of the Humanities 21 Committee. Jeff is a member of the Committee of Management, Humanities 21, and he was first introduced to ancient Greece as an undergraduate student at Melbourne University, where he completed his first degree, a Bachelor of Arts. After decades working in programming, robotics, and pioneering online learning, Jeff returned to undertake a course in ancient Greek. Jeff is also a member of the Coup de Bean Champions, a comedy troupe that has been performing, recording, publishing, and broadcasting in Australia for over 3 decades. So please join me, everyone, in welcoming Jeff Richardson.
Thank you, mate. The second Melbourne Homer Festival brought to you by Humanities 21. As you can see, our format is a debate today. Our debating team here on the stage is Steve Curry, Chris Mackey, Annabelle Mitchell and Chris Gribbon. We've got Steve and Chris who will be arguing that Achilles was indeed a hero. And we've got Annabelle and Chris who will be arguing more that he was more like a psychopath than a hero. Now, some of you may have been puzzled when you came into the room that there was a small granite pebble on your chair. Those are ostraki. Who can tell me what an ostraki is? Some say for voting, some say they were more like how to vote cards. But yes, they relate to the Athenian democracy, and they originally were leaves, I think. Right, and then they were replaced with pot shards because olive leaves was a bit too easy to read the results of the election. The modern word in English, ostracism, comes from ostraki, because they were most commonly used in ostracisms where you would write on your piece of broken pottery the name of the person who you wished to be kicked out of the city. And everyone would come up at the end with their shard, drop it in a pot, and at the end they were counted, and normally in an ostracism, the person whose name got the most votes had to leave the city. Sometimes forever, sometimes for a year, but we're going to use our ostraki at the end of the debate today to decide who has won. So you've all got your ostraki, you've got plenty of time to think about it. We will take argument from both sides, and then there'll be time for you to question our speakers, and then we'll take a brief pause where the Homer Festival's Where is Homer competition will be decided, and our two student winners will be introduced to you, during which that'll give you a bit of thinking time, after which we'll ask you to come forward and cast your ostraki, and we'll see who has won the debate. So, but first of all, I'm going to go down the panel and get our debaters to introduce themselves quickly to you. Steve.
Hopefully that's on. Yes. Hi, I'm Steve Curry. I am a philosopher by trade, although in recent years I've worked in government service and private industry. And obviously I got my introduction to Homer when I was an undergraduate studying literature and philosophy, at which point obviously Homer intersects both. And I will be arguing that Achilles is a hero.
Chris.
I'm Chris Mackey. I work at La Trobe University, where I've been for about 7 or 8 years, and before that I was at Melbourne for 20-something years. And I like to work on Homer as much as I can. It's a great delight and pleasure to be here. So that's what I do.
Annabelle.
Hello, I'm Annabelle Orchard. I'm I'm a learning designer at Melbourne Uni. My introduction to Homer was actually at my primary school prep class. We had about a third of the kids at the primary school were Greek, and so was the principal. So we had a Trojan War against the other prep class. we were the Greeks, we won. I don't think the other prep understood that so well. I've stalled on writing my thesis. My supervisor's sitting next to me. We haven't actually read about it for about 10 years. I've probably forgotten, which is on Achilles. People used to ask me when my son was born, "You're going to name him after Achilles?" And I said, "No, he's got a repellent personality and miserable death, not my son." So I named him after a real hero, Felix the cat.
Chris.
Hi, I'm Chris Cribben. I did a PhD in 2001 looking at Greek myth and religion and philosophy, something that's always fascinated me. Since then I've been doing all manner of things that are connected with those interests, including this Festival of Homer.
Thank you. Our teams have already conducted the toss and decided who is going to open things up for us. So I believe, Steve, you're opening the batting for the hero side.
We'll follow my glorious leader.
Well, the title, I don't have a speech or anything, but the title of this obviously relates to the life of Brian, where it says he's not, where the mother, Brian's mother says, he's not the Messiah, he's a naughty little boy. And that's Brian. And even though I'm going to argue that Achilles is very definitely a hero, I'm not going to argue that he's the Messiah, because he is, one of the themes of this is that he has a fairly erratic personality, but that's okay. So let me just check my notes and talk to you about what I'm going to say. The first thing is the language of naughty boy. He is very young. He's a very young figure. That comes through in all sorts of ways. And when you think about it, he never separated from his mother. He's the only Greek warrior who has any engagement with his mother in the way that, say, Hector does in the Iliad. And so there's even been a book written called Childlike Achilles by a guy called McCary, where he's never separated from his mother, and that informs a lot of the characteristics. Now you'll notice in book 1, for instance, when things don't go his way about Chryseis and Chryseis, he throws a tantrum, basically. And even the language is quite interesting because, if you know the Odyssey, Telemachus in the Odyssey and Achilles in the Iliad, the same language is used when they throw the baton down, the scepter down, when they don't get their way. So it's almost like the Homeric poet, let's call him Homer, has used the same language of both Achilles and Telemachus. So the youth of Achilles is really quite fundamental. He is a quintessentially young hero, and that's important because, of course, he's going to die early, and so it's a terrible thing, obviously, when people die young, and that's kind of a core part of what he's like and so forth. He's the only person in the Iliad who's called Deinos terrible. It's a very important word from which we get dinosaur and things like that. He's quite that's Patroclus, his friend Patroclus, that calls him Deinos. So he's somebody who is by nature erratic. He's the quintessential outsider. I'll say a bit more about that in a minute, but he's the quintessential outsider. He's somebody who is totally separate from the community. You might know, if you follow the Iliad, you can identify, if you go into it fairly closely, you can identify where the individual Greeks have their camps. And because Homer tells you little points along the way. And Achilles has his camp right down one end, the 1,000 ships and all sorts of stuff. Achilles has his camp down one end. Odysseus has his camp right in the middle, which tells you something about Odysseus. And the other person who has his camp right down the other end is Ajax. It's kind of interesting because Achilles and Ajax in the broader Homeric tradition, in the broader mythological tradition, are both kind of separate and outside from the community. So Achilles is a northerner. When you think about all these princes who were embarked on the sack of Troy, they're mostly from the south, from the Peloponnese, from Salamis in the case of Ajax, from Ithaca in the case of Odysseus, and Agamemnon and Menelaus are from Peloponnese and so forth. Where's Achilles from? He's from Thessaly, he's from Thea. You're thinking, where the hell is that? So he's a strange guy from a strange place that's quite different from the other places where the Greek warriors come from. I mean, we know where Mycenae is, where Agamemnon is from. We know where Argos is from, where Dardanus is from, and so forth. So he's quite different in all sorts of ways like that. So there are a number of things that make him seem to me quintessentially heroic. And Homer kind of pinpoints them. One of course is his relationship with horses, with other creatures and so forth. He's somebody who has immortal horses who are just totally, he's got the best horses, they're immortal horses. Horses in this world of Homer are a sign of heroism. You might know book 23 where the funeral games of Patroclus are held, and the horse struggle, which Diomedes wins, takes up easily the longest period of time, and so the horse is quintessentially heroic, and Achilles is the best horseman with the best horses, and they're immortal horses. He even talks to his horses, that tells you something about. Also his horses in his background. Achilles is brought up by Chiron, the centaur. That's mentioned a few times. He also has another prince called Phoenix who teaches him in the Iliad. So he is a hero in that sense. And I'll be pushing the idea that even though he's young and erratic and so forth, that doesn't make him a naughty little boy and so forth. Another thing I think worth mentioning is his association with fire. He is, and Annabelle can talk about this because she was doing a PhD on this. with me as her supervisor, but ignore everything she has to say. I know these guys both really well, so I know. Just trust me. By the way, I said to somebody before we came in, if anyone who wants to rest holding their ostraca can put them in this particular one here, so pass that around. So yes, another aspect of the heroism of Achilles is his capacity to engage with fire, to run through fire. You might know the fiery rivers commander in Iliad book 21, where fire has no impact on him. He's sort of moving through this fiery world of Scamander and so forth. He has the capacity to go through fire. So in all sorts of ways, whether you talk about horses or fire or these kinds of things, Achilles is quite distinctly heroic. How long have I got, Jeff?
I was just about to ring the bell again.
Let me say two final things. If you know your classics and you go to Sophocles, you'll find in the dramatic works of Sophocles, some of the great heroes are from this tradition. So you've got people like Ajax, and you've got people like Antigone and Philoctetes and Electra. And what are they like? They're all intense, they're all a little bit erratic, they're all separate from the community, they're a little bit unhinged. But we never question their heroism, because these are the best heroes, because they're like that. And who do they emulate? Homer's Achilles, because he is the quintessential example of one of these sorts of things. And one final point: how can I talk about heroism without mentioning Alexander the Great? Alexander the Great, so Plutarch tells us, had slept under his pillow at night 2 things. One is a dagger, and the other is Homer's Iliad, ascribed by Aristotle. I often talk to my students about how much would that copy of the Iliad be worth? I want that Iliad. Can you imagine a copy of the Iliad owned by Alexander the Great and edited by Aristotle? But Alexander led his life in emulation of Achilles. And that tells you the greatest warrior of our tradition used Homer's Iliad and Achilles in particular as a model. So that's all can I say.
Thank you. We now pass over to the team arguing that Achilles was in fact a very naughty boy. And
Happily, I've memorised the whole of the Iliad, so I just got room for a dagger on my pillow. Quite simple life. What I'm going to talk about today is just some of the terms that are in this question. I'm going to start with the term hero, and I'd like everyone to have a think about who is your hero, a contemporary hero. Who is your hero and why? Think for a moment, and then I'm going to ask someone to volunteer. I can start you off. Mine is David Attenborough. He's a hero of mine because he's pioneered work in the area of television, and he's used that opportunity to spread word about conservation and environmentalism, and has really made a great difference, I think, to the way we talk about nature and the way we care about the planet. Has anyone else got one?
Mandela, because he avoided civil war in an incredibly violent country.
Mandela, because he avoided civil war in an incredibly violent country. He was working on a cause that in an unjust environment, and did something for the community, for his community, for the better of the community. Any others? Gandhi. And why is Gandhi your hero?
Because again, he used a policy to revolutionise how people subcontinent with excellent results.
So,
and with no violence. And it impacted on an awful lot of people, people's views, and it's no bloodshed.
So it's changed lives for the better without violence. As someone who's done something very altruistic.
Tony
That's
Moore.
altruism.
I'm not taking any more names.
She won't take it from me. She won't take
Altruism, I think, is a big thing in being.
Honour, that's right. Honour. And I think they're some of the things that we do expect from our heroes. We expect altruism, honour, we expect just causes, we expect people to do things for others. That's the sort of thing that we think about when we're thinking about a hero in our culture. And I don't think we should be too apologetic about bringing our modern lens to ancient stories here, because after all, there are no ancient Greeks in the audience today. There are definitely some Greek people, and we're all getting older, but the question isn't, what did the ancient Greeks think about whether Achilles was a hero? The question is, what do we think? Was he a hero, or was he a naughty boy? And what does a hero mean for us? Just thinking about some Greek heroes, I think probably Achilles aside, one of the quintessential Greek heroes is Heracles. He ridded the landscape of monsters and beasts, who made the place safer for people. He also murdered his children and his wife. He was also a drunk. He was a pretty naughty boy. He did some terrible things. Jason, he went off to fetch the golden fleece to remove the curse of Phrixus from his land. But he also left his girlfriend behind, the one who helped him on the way. So he was a bit of a naughty boy too. I think when we think of the Greek heroes, they didn't seem to have a conflict between having a heroic person who was also a naughty boy. So that's the next term, it's the or. Do you have to be either or in the Greek context? I don't think so. But the next question is, well, in fact, in modern terms, we've invented a different category for that, and we've got the anti-hero, because we do have such expectations of the hero that if we've got someone who behaves or in a way that we don't feel meets our expectations as a hero, we call them an anti-hero. That's a term from the 17th century, I think, 18th century. So it's a fairly modern concept. But I look at Achilles now, and the question of whether he's a hero. Now, in Book 1 of the Iliad, Agamemnon calls him a spearman. Agamemnon's trying to downplay his status here. He's trying to make, in a context where they're an assembly of princes and warlords, he's trying to make Achilles sound very small. But he really does hit the nail on the head there in some ways, because what Achilles is, quintessentially, is a warrior. He is a warrior, and that's what he's doing at the Trojan War. He's a warrior with unparalleled skill on the battlefield. He's an exceptional warrior. He's the best of the Achaeans, and we know this is true because he says so himself. So he's unsurpassed in his skill. He's also got the best equipment. He's got the goodies. His arms and armour reflect his status as an unparalleled warrior. So he's got armour made by the smith god, it's pretty special. He's got divine horses who talk, as Chris says, and a spear that no other warrior can even ever wield. So this sets him apart in the sense of being a warrior. They're all things that you take onto the battlefield. The good thing about being a child of God is you get really good presents. And all of these things were handed down from his parents, they're all wedding gifts. But he's being the greatest warrior, and I'll acknowledge that he is that enough to make someone a hero? Perhaps from our perspective on what a hero is, this depends on which side they're on, whether we consider it to be a just cause. We consider modern warriors who are heroes with the army if they're looking after civilians, if they're trying to make things safe. They're our modern warriors, but there are an awful lot of warriors around who aren't in the army, and we might not consider them to be heroes. So what's Achilles' cause? Why is he at Troy? So he says to Agamemnon in Book 1, he didn't come to Troy to fight the Trojans because they hadn't done anything to him. They hadn't got in the way of his cattle or mucked up his crops or anything like that. Rather, he said, he's come to Troy to do a favour for Agamemnon, Menelaus, and to get his share of the booty, of the spoils of war. This material reward and recognition is really so important for him that when that's threatened, when that material recognition of his status as the best warrior is taken away, or status as a great warrior, he sees no point in remaining in battle. So for him, the nature of the cause doesn't matter. He's there to be recognised as for his warrior prowess. And we have a word for that too, a modern word, and that's a mercenary. And we don't necessarily think of a mercenary as a hero. It doesn't automatically make them heroes. So in summary, with ancient Greek hero narrative, it's not a case of either or, hero, naughty boy. You can be both. But the question remains, does Achilles have the qualities that we expect to consider him a hero? So after Peter spoke, my colleague Chris is going to respond to this question and demonstrate that, unlike Greek heroes we discussed earlier, Achilles is not a hero, but just a very naughty boy.
Now we move back to the hero side. Stephen.
Anyone can have notes. I wrote things down too. Otherwise I can have a terrible memory. I'd like to thank our opponents for laying the groundwork for our victory in this debate. Very decent of you. I'm the token philosopher on the panel, so I'm seriously outcome when it actually comes to knowing the book, or its context, or any of the actual Greek words that are used in it. So because I'm a philosopher, I'm going to cheat. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to urge you not to ask yourself if the person living within the world of the book is a hero, but to look at him as a character in literature, and to ask yourselves, what is he doing as a character in literature? And why is it, so many thousands of years after its composition, is this work, the Iliad, still part of our literary canon? Right? There are many, many other works that were composed in the oral tradition of the archaic Greeks, many works that were written down, many works that have been received by us and which scholars can study, but very few that all of us will have read in school, that all of us will have in our homes. I don't know about you, but I still keep a copy next to my bed. Right? No, I have to have more than just a dagger under the pillow, so there's no room. But why do some works of the canon endure like this? Why are they classics in the truest possible sense? And for me, it is the last book of the Iliad that transforms it from a work of historical and literary interest into a classic. Because in that last book, something happens that makes sense of the rest and makes sense of the book for us, that makes it able to speak to us now, thousands of years after its author died, and that we keep coming back to. And I think what I want to urge you to think about is what happens when we go back to a work of literature. We read it with our own eyes, in our own place, in our own context, and we find something in it that speaks to us and helps us to think about our place in our world. And that's the Achilles I want us to think about, and that's the Achilles that I urge you to believe is a hero, and a contemporary hero. A hero that we can go back to the book, however illicit or illicit that might be as a way of reading. We can go back to that book, reflect on it, and take from it something that can tell us something we want to know about how we live in the present. Because the entire description of what we've been given of what a true hero is a contemporary notion of what heroism looks like now. That we then read into the book and go, that's not someone I'd want to share a beer with. Okay? But at the end, something happens to Achilles. Okay? In the book, after the funeral games of his friend Patroclus, he's described as being in grief. But that grief is tinged with guilt. Recall, he blames himself for Patroclus' death. If he had not been sitting out the battle, and if he had not loaned his armour to his friends to impersonate him, his friend would not have ended up in a duel with Hector in the first place. Right? So this is grief, but it's grief which comes from a place of profound guilt. And I suspect it's the first time in this young man's life he's ever really felt guilt. Right? In that sense, I think our opponents are quite correct. This is a boy, extremely immature boy, who has, for the first time, suddenly felt something which takes him out of himself and his self-concern. Right? And this is what happens to young men when they mature and stop being boys. It's that ability to outgrow the selfishness of youth, something which takes a very long time and some of us never quite achieve. Right? In his grief, he then confronts the grief of Priam, who, as you will recall, comes to the camp, the guidance of the gods, to retrieve the body of his favourite son, goes on his knees, grabs the legs of Achilles and pleads with him, and reminds him of the grief his own father will feel when Achilles himself dies. And in that moment, there is, I think, in the way I read that book, a moment of pure connection between them. They describe as going off together to weep. They weep together, each of them weeping for their loss, but also for the larger loss that each of them will yet experience. Each of them will be the cause of, and the grief that each of them will leave behind when they die. And there's a moment of almost pure human connection between them. And then Achilles does what he was going to do anyway, which is hand back the body of Hector. And sure, he collects a ransom for it, right, which he's been promised by the gods he will get. But he gives some of the ransom back, so that Hector can be taken back to the city appropriately dressed and ornamented. And he gives something else, peace. Only 9 days worth, but peace. Because Priam asks him for time to bury his son. And I don't know what authority Achilles has to do this and what the argument's going to be like at headquarters afterwards, but he says, absolutely, you will have 9 days of truce to conduct a proper funeral rites for your son. Something which, so giving back the treasure to dress the body and granting the truce were not things that the gods had demanded of him, were not things that he was expected to do, things he granted because they were in his power. In that last book, he gives up for the first time his status, his power, his wealth, the very booty he came to collect, because of that final profound insight that he is the author of a great tragedy, which before that it was all about him. Everything else in the poem is the lead up, I think, to that moment when he realizes, I have actually made choices which have brought both myself, the people I care about, and other people are now inevitable doom. And that doom matters. It matters that others will die. And in that moment, I think he becomes a hero because he is transformed. Because at that moment, he has a depth of moral insight, that heroic archetype of which he was a part. Right? He's a hero very much in that sense. Right? In the historical, traditional sense of what a hero was meant to be for the archaic Greeks. So my colleague here was also entirely correct, and you should vote on that basis too. But at that last moment, he is transformed into something other. He stands outside of his own archetype, his own existence, his own sense of who he is, and looks back on it with a profound shock, I think. And in that moment, he is capable of accessing a range of human feeling, a range of human motivation that was previously lost in him. And tragically for him, it comes to him far too late to change the course of the rest of his short life. And far too late to change the outcome for everybody else. And that's part of the reason I think that he and Priam weep. Right? And so we're not looking here at a simplistic claim that, oh look, we need to grow up morally and the world will be a better place. The world is not a better place after Achilles has this insight. But he lives in that world with a far more profound sense of the tragedy of that existence. And I want to see him as someone we can look at and say, do we need that moment of insight? Do we need the courage that he has at the end to accept his real nature and the nature of what he has done? And I'm thinking very much at the moment about the time in which we live and the question of the toxicity of masculinity. And how he's almost the archetype of toxic masculinity, but one which has to confront itself in the end. And is redeemed through kindness, gentleness, and peace. Albeit a temporary one, a partial one. But it's a confronting, I think, at the end of the book, of the very nature of that existence as the archetypical, ultimate masculine warlord. Right? Has to step away from that and weep for the very nature of who he is. And in his weeping, I think he is a new kind of hero. In his kindness, he's a new kind of hero. And there's an opportunity in reading that book and rereading it so that you can read that last chapter in its context so that we can weep. And in that is a hope for a different kind of future, and for people like me as men to go, what does a masculine courage look like? Real masculine courage look like? Because in him it's contrasted so clearly with that traditional view of masculine courage and masculinity. And so maybe he's not heroic in the sense that he hasn't run into a building to rescue a child or charged the beaches at Normandy or whatever else, but he's heroic because he has the courage to look at himself afresh, not like what he sees, and accept it anyway. And if that's not the hero we need today, then I don't know what is. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. And now the final speaker in the negative to convince us that Achilles is not a hero.
Thank you. So I enjoyed Stephen's talk. I like the concept that we can look at all of the things that Achilles has done. We can look at all of the people that he's killed. We can look at the people that he stabbed in the head, he chopped the head off, the man whose body he threw into the river just so that his parents wouldn't be able to bury him. That we can look at the fact that Achilles tells us at one point that he's taken 12 cities with his ships and taken a great store of wealth from every one of them, including a number of people. That is, in other words, that Achilles is not only a mercenary, but he's actually basically a slave-owning pirate. I like the idea that we can take all of that past and just throw it away and say, no, we don't need to worry about that. That doesn't tell us about his nature because in the end, he's redeemed. In the end, he has a change of heart. In the end, he sees the error of his ways. But there's one little problem with that interpretation, and that is that Achilles' decision to give back the body of Hector to his father doesn't come about because of some change of heart. It comes about because Zeus decides that that's what needs to happen. And the interesting thing, the most interesting thing, is that the way that Zeus decides to make his will known is that he goes to Achilles' mother, says to his mother, you need to tell off your son and tell him to give the body back. And this gets to the fundamental point that I really want to talk about today, which is that Achilles is, in a lot of ways, very childlike, as Chris mentioned beforehand. And I don't want to be accused of some sort of bringing inappropriate modern concepts into this. I'd like to focus on the concept of what it is to be childlike that we find in Homer. That we find, in fact, in the very words of Achilles. Because in Book 16 of the Iliad, Achilles is telling off Patroclus and accusing him of being childlike. And so he gives us this wonderful description of what it is to be childlike, to be essentially a boy. He says, why do you stand there, weeping like some silly child that comes running to her mother and begs to be taken up and carried? She catches hold of her mother's dress to stay her, though she's in a hurry, and looks tearfully up until her mother carries her. That's a description of a child that we get from Achilles himself. So the key elements of that description to my mind are, first of all, clinging to your mother. Secondly, making a big fuss and throwing a tantrum. Thirdly, only worrying about what you want and not worrying about the consequences for anyone else. And fourthly, attention seeking. That's what it means to be a child. That's what it means to be a naughty boy. The question we have is, does this describe Achilles' behaviour? And yes, it does. So, I will just go through each of those points in turn to give you that full picture of how much of a naughty little boy Achilles is. So the first one is clinging to your mother. The Iliad starts off with Achilles and Agamemnon having a fight. And thanks to the intervention of the gods, Agamemnon gets the better of it. So, what's the first thing Achilles does? He goes off crying until his mother comes to comfort him. That's the very first thing. What's the next thing? He needs to solve the problem. What does he do? He talks to his mother and asks his mother to intervene on his behalf. He asks his mother to go to Zeus, help me out, sort out my problems for me. That's the first thing he does. So, clinging to your mother, very much a characteristic of what Achilles is about and the way that he responds. The second thing I mentioned is that, the second characteristic of being a child, is that of making a big fuss and throwing a tantrum. And nobody throws a better tantrum than Achilles. That, in its essence, is the story of the Iliad, is the tantrum of Achilles. That could, in fact, be should we want to go with that. So, Achilles' first response to a problem, as I say, is to run crying to mummy. His second response is to throw a big tantrum and sob. And really, he actually throws sort of a two-phase tantrum, if you like. The first one is the big sob. He goes off to his tent. He refuses to do anything. As his comrades are being killed, still he refuses to do anything. Agamemnon comes to make amends to Achilles, and I think he really puts in a good effort towards that. We're told he brings 7 tripods, 10 talents of gold, 20 iron cauldrons, 12 strong horses, 7 beautiful workwomen, 1 inappropriately taken slave girl, and of course a partridge in a pear tree. Plus he promises a whole lot of other things to give him after the sack of Troy. Which really, you've got to say, if you're saying sorry for something, that's a pretty generous way of saying sorry. He's not mincing around with that. But still, Achilles is too busy sulking to take on board any of that. Ultimately, in fact, even after that, he decides that the best thing for him to do is to go home and abandon his comrades, leave the Greeks that he spent the last 9 years fighting with to their own fate, fully aware as he is that the Greeks can't win without him. So he decides he's going to go home, knowing that that will mean that his comrades are going to lose. It really is a case of, if I can't get my way, then I'm not playing the game at all. He might as well be just throwing the Monopoly board onto the floor so nobody else can win. That's the first phase of his tantrum, the giant sob. And in the second phase we get when somebody takes away something that's his. Namely, in this case, his dear friend Patroclus. So what does he do when that gets taken away from him? He throws the angry tantrum. He starts breaking whatever he can find. And in this case, the things that he can find is Trojans. He breaks them here, there, left, right, everywhere. While it's understandable that he might want revenge for the death of Patroclus, while he might want revenge on Hector, that's not all Achilles is doing. He is killing every person that he can come across. He's doing so much of that in fact we're told the river Scamander is clogged with their bodies. When a couple of Trojans beg for mercy, Achilles refuses to hear anything from them. He won't have any part of that. And as I mentioned before, in one case he even throws the body of this person into the river, specifically so that he cannot be given a proper funeral by his family. So there's nothing to be benefit. There's no benefit to Achilles to that. This person isn't the one that's killed Patroclus. He's not the one that's responsible for any of these things. Achilles is simply angry and is lashing out, attacking anything and anyone that he possibly can. And the third characteristic of being a naughty boy is that of only worrying about yourself. This, again, very much characterises what Achilles is about. This sulk that he has when he goes back to his tent and refuses to fight costs the lives of many Greeks. The opening sentence of the Iliad, in fact, tells us that this anger brought countless ills upon the Greeks. It's the fundamental fact, essentially, of what this story is about. And as I mentioned before, if Achilles had gone through with his threat to go home, it would have meant complete loss for the Greeks. And for what? What is the great principle? What is the noble cause that Achilles is prepared to sacrifice all of his comrades' lives for? It's nothing more than the fact that a slave girl has been taken away from him. And we do find some comments in the Iliad that maybe he loves her, she's very dear to him, and so on and so forth. But I think it's worth just mentioning a couple of interesting facts about that relationship. One is he's actually only known her for a few weeks. This is not somebody that he's had this long-standing, well-developed relationship with. And another thing that I think is really worth pointing out about that relationship is that it's Achilles that kills her former husband before he takes her as a slave girl. So I'm not entirely convinced that after a few weeks after that they've really formed this close bond and this close connection. This is not a story about love. This is a story about simply someone having their stuff taken, or their toy essentially. He's had his toy taken away from him and he's lashing out and getting violent. And that's what's going on there. Now, the fourth factor I wanted to mention, the fourth characteristic of being childlike is attention seeking. And again, that's an area where Achilles is very, very competent. After he has killed Hector, after he has achieved his revenge, you would think that might be the end of things. He's done what he needed to do. Perhaps he's got that out of his system, but no. He wants to make a big show of things. He's not done yet. What he does is that he ties the body of Hector to his chariot, drags it around on the ground in front of Hector's parents, in front of Hector's wife, takes it back to his camp, dumps it there in the middle of the camp, leaving it there for several days, then later decides to attach it to his chariot again and go around Patroclus' tomb, dragging it in front of everybody. There's no practical benefit to this. There's no personal benefit to this. It is purely a matter of getting attention so that everybody knows how upset Achilles is, so that they can come, presumably, and give him the hug that he so desperately craves. So, that's really all I want to say. There's no question that Achilles is a great fighter. He slaughters countless people on the battlefield. The Iliad makes it very clear that the Trojans are superior to the Greeks without him, that he is that linchpin that enables them to have victory. And there's no question that he can do a variety of spectacular deeds. But the question we have to ask ourselves when looking at the totality of the story is he actually heroic, Or is he simply more a petulant child, someone lacking in self-control and throwing tantrums when he doesn't get his way? And I think the answer to that is very clearly the latter.
Thank you, Chris, and thanks to all our speakers. Can I just ask for a repeated round of applause for our entire panel? Now I'd like to give you the opportunity to ask any questions of any of our speakers that you may have before we move to casting our votes as to who's won. Just to recapitulate what we're going to do here, give you a chance to ask a few questions. Once you've done that, we'll be having the winner of the Where's Homer competition associated with the festival, and then we'll cast our votes. Who's got a question?
Sorry. Will I ask all of them? Or
You can ask whoever you, or as many or as few as you like.
I'd like to ask Chris Gribbin, because he mentioned the totality of the story, and I wondered whether you considered that a writer such as Homer was writing a story that had a development, and whether the character of Achilles has developed, and whether you wouldn't feel that the final chapter was the culmination of that development, and that is that Achilles has altered from being a naughty boy into being the hero that probably Homer thought he was.
Absolutely, there's a story there, and there's a development there, and there's changes that occur between Achilles. There's a realisation. I think it's one of the things that gives the Iliad that great poignancy, is that at the end of the Achilles is really just starting off throwing a tantrum purely out of selfish motives. What he doesn't realise, or what he doesn't realise at the time, was anticipated at the time, is that that's going to cost him so dearly, as it does when he loses Patroclus. And so, really, after that happens, the remaining part of the poem is his transformation and his coming to terms with that in various ways. I guess the question is, I guess there's two questions to ask about that. One is he a changed character? Now, certainly he has realised that things have gone badly, but has he redeemed himself? I don't know. The way that he treats Hector's body, that doesn't seem, if the great learning is going to happen, surely the great learning happens when he loses Patroclus. And that doesn't seem to be the thing that triggers him into saying, perhaps I need to be less selfish. So I guess that's one question. And then the other question I was simply asking, you talk about the totality. Is that enough even if he does have this change, even if he does have a change of heart to say, perhaps I need to be less self-centered, is that enough to redeem him? Can you go around killing all these people and doing all these things and sacking all these cities, owning all these slaves, doing all these things, but at the end, if you have a bit of regret, then it's all okay? I'm not sure it's the quite works that way. I'm not the first.
Thank you, Chris. I think you were happy for Ryan to reply on that.
Just one thing occurred to me, and probably I should have talked about for others maybe, is the role of Athena in the poem, because she is the goddess of heroism. And you will be aware that in book 22, she conspires, is probably the wrong word, but she helps to deceive Hector, leave him without any weapon to fight and so forth. So her place is absolutely crucial in conveying not just the heroism of Achilles, but heroism, she's usually there when heroes do their stuff. So she's there very much. So she, in her own way, and the gods themselves are party to the sorts of horrendous things going on in the battlefield. I myself don't subscribe very much to the view that there is a transformation in Achilles throughout the poem, but Stephen pointed out the totally astonishing moment of the Iliad when he just turns to Priam and says, how long do you need to bury the body of Hector. And everything else, as Chris pointed out in his talk, is you saying, can you do this, can you do that? But that act of altruism is really probably the most astonishing part of the Iliad.
Thanks. Who else has a question? Yes. Wait, there's a microphone coming.
To what extent does the fact that Homer / the gods bestow Glaucus on Achilles make him a hero as opposed to a very naughty boy?
To what extent does the gods favour making a hero rather than...
Well, yeah, it seems to me that is a crucial moment, the God's role in creating the clouds for Achilles, because he is in pursuit of Klaus Afterthon, immortality, if you like. I mean, what does Achilles really want from all this? He wants the immortality that comes through song, Klaus Afterthon, and it seems to me that their role is absolutely crucial in giving him the Klaus that he requires and that he wants and so forth. As we saw with Athena, as we see with Thetis, as we see with Zeus, it seems to me absolutely crucial. Impossible for him to acquire that Klaus without divine intrusion in that sense.
I'll just add to that, however, that he's got a bit of an inside edge there with his mum. So what she's doing in order to, and getting a favour from Zeus to support Achilles to get his tangent to actually work, is interesting, because that's not, that's very personal. It's not about whether he's a hero, it's about the fact that she's his son and he's asked her, and she wants to help him and she wants to make things good for him too. So there are a number of gods, I guess, in the story doing things not because Achilles is a hero, but because they owe someone, or they owe Thetis. Hephaestus giving her the armour because he owes her for something, because she and her sister looked after him when he was thrown off Olympus. So there's a lot of, with the gods, there's actually a lot of bargaining and a lot of sort of shifting around of responsibility there too, which is in addition to to whoever Achilles is. It's actually there's a lot of backstory.
Thanks. Who else has a question?
Thank you. One for Stephen's question. How does altruism fit in the category of being a hero, and Achilles represents altruism in some sense at all?
Okay. First of all, as my learned opposition so clearly pointed out, our contemporary idea of heroism is tied up with altruism. It's the giving of the self, in some sense, to others. It's very much what we now believe heroism consists of, in combination with some kind of courage. If the giving hurts, if it's dangerous, then that's our notion of heroism. I don't think any of the examples that have been thrown up of people's sort of ideals of heroes today contradict that notion. I think the moment of altruism, the end of the Iliad for me though, is about something more than that, because it comes from a place, I think, of self-realisation. The moment when Achilles doesn't merely feel bad about all the toys he broke, but when he, I think, appreciates the tragedy of the fact that this will be who he is forever. He can't undo who he is. And he has to confront that fact. And for the first time in his life, he tries to do something without expectation of reward. And the key thing is, especially given everything we know about what is supposed to happen to him later, and everything he knows, and part of what he weeps about in that book, is his knowledge that nothing he now does will undo the fate that awaits him. Right? So he's helping Priam with his grief, knowing that for the first time in his life there is nothing to be bargained for. Right? He's in fact not redeemed, and I think that's the source of his heroism. Because, and here I'm wearing my little philosophical ethics hat for a second, you're only really doing good when you give without expectation of reward, or when you give knowing that you'll be the one who pays the price for someone else's good. And it's the only time, I think, must have been his whole life that Achilles does that. And he does it in the full knowledge that he's doing it as the first time a really bad person. The first time perhaps the epithet destroyer of cities isn't something to be proud of. And for me, that's the kind of moral heroism that ultimately doesn't redeem him as a person, but perhaps helps him to be the hero of the story in a truer possible sense.
I'll just step in there and say, he does actually take the reward.
So I'm going to curtail questions at that point. I'm sure lots of you have got all sorts of ideas you would like to take up with our panellists, and they'll be delighted to speak with you informally afterwards. But now I'd like you to just think about which urn you're going to cast your Ostraki into. And while you're thinking, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Deb Cordingley, also a committee member at Humanities 21, and we're going to hear from the winners of the 2018 Melbourne Homer Festival Where's Homer competition. Deb.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say it's a little bit daunting to get up and speak after 3 academics and a philosopher, but I'm going to do my best. Okay, so good afternoon. I'd like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations as the traditional custodians of the land upon which we are gathered today. We pay our respects to the local people for allowing us to have our gathering on their land and to their elders past, present and future. Now, Homer, the ancient poet of the Greeks, sung Homer, sung the hospitality rules and the adventures of past peoples across the Greek lands. He shared the stories of great heroes and their inner turmoil. For me, it's imperative that our young people of today hear about the complexities of the human condition and the emotional responses of heroes when they find themselves in terrible situations or a quiet moment reflecting on their loved ones. There is no better way than reading, discussing, writing and performing Homer's epic poetry. Now, Penguin Classics have reduced Homer down into these tiny, wee little books, which is great for a busy classroom. And Humanities 21 have offered a Where's Homer competition for students to respond to Homer's great works. So, Year 8 students, 14-year-olds, took one line from Homer's Odyssey, Book 9, The Cyclops, and extended Homer's words and blended them back into a following line of poetry. Therefore, the first and last words of these performances are Homer's, and the rest is the students' work. This is no mean feat. Jasmine Shaw was our 2017 winner of the Where's Homer competition. May I introduce Jasmine to present her epic poem to you. Thank you.
I am Jasmine Shaw, daughter of the 21st century's Wonder Woman. Known for my angelic singing, my intelligence has reached the skies. Multicultural Melbourne is my home. Now Zeus, who masses the storm clouds, hit the fleet with the north wind, a howling, demonic gale, shrouding over in thunderheads the earth at sea once. And night swept down from the sky, and the ships went plunging headlong on, our sails slashed to rags by the hurricane's blast. We struck them. Cringing at death, we rowed our ships to the nearest shoreline, pulled with all our power. There for 2 nights, 2 days, we lay by, no let up, eating our hearts out, bent with pain and bone-tired. Our lives felt lost without our loved ones. A moment taken like a lifetime of experiences flashed before the burning embers of the fire. In the red-hot flame dancing before me, my dearest Penelope enters my mind. There she sits, weaving her magic with golden threads. Her hair falls over her slender shoulders, a queen for any man to crave. Has another man entered her heart? A long time she waits for her husband, the man of twists and turns, as he strives to find her loving arms reaching out to him. Another man stroking her velvet skin, tangling his fingers in golden locks of hair, just as I had done so many years ago. Uncertainty boiling beneath my skin, the fire dancing her story, the flames slowly turned to resting coals, my heart blackened. When young dawn with her rose-red fingers shone once more, anguish remained with us. The blazing sun reminding me of sunny Ithaca, memories abound. There we sat, the beach cool and fine, soft sand against our skin, staring into each other's eyes, nothing but devotion between us. My heart weakened as another memory entered my mind. Through tall olive trees we weaved, laughter reaching the clouds that stretch across the sky, Ithaca's sun beaming. It was hard to bear the weight of the memories alone, for I was without heart, abandoned by my hope. I was overwhelmed and took for myself the strongest wine in my possession. Intoxicated, I fell into a doze, a sweet slumber to protect me. Aphrodite, the goddess of love, gifted me with a dream. She sang, "Your grief is blinding you of the journey home. Your wife awaits your homecoming. Have hope, and you will return safely to your family." Awoken in the midst of night, the moon illuminated a path on Poseidon's sea. The path Aphrodite has left for me. This path I shall follow until our vessels beach once more on sunny Ithaca's shores. When dawn with her lovely locks brought on the third day, then stepping the mast and hoisting white sails high, we lounged the oarlocks, letting wind and helmsman keep us true on course.
Second time I've heard Jasmine present that to an audience, and it's still as great as the first time. So we want to ask you, what inspired you to write this poem?
So what inspired me in writing this poem was Homer's dramatic style of writing, with well-structured action throughout the novel. The specific descriptions of every single detail really set the scene. It was a challenging style of literature which intrigued me. It was a challenge to read and replicate.
Well done. And what did you like about studying Homer?
What I liked about studying Homer was his unique style of literature. It was a different style which gave me a taste of Greek mythology, history, culture, and moral systems.
Okay, so thanks very much, Jasmine. Your poem is impressive and shows deep insight into the understanding of the human psyche. Well done. Thank you. Okay, so we come to this year now. So could you please join me in welcoming Gabe Gladberg to perform his poem?
I am Gabriel, son of Vitali, known to the world for playing music. My fame has reached the top of the skies to the bottom of hell. Rainy Melbourne is my home. Luck of the draw, I got the very ones I would have picked myself. 4 good men and I in the lead made 5. I remembered when they joined my loyal crew. Willingly indeed, for the lives they lived were dull. They were not contented. So I, Odysseus, the man of twists and turns, saved those 4 men, Egon, Dromius, Creon, and Gallus from their impending doom. Dromius and Creon being the best of brothers, Egon and Gallus being the best of friends. They came from the same glorious place I did, sunny Ithaca. It was the Battle of Troy. My crew of 50 men had docked our vast fleet of ships on the sandy banks of Troy. And there, staring us right in the face, was the kingdom of Troy. They knew we were coming. Arrows rained upon us, our fallen men littering the narrow streets filled with blood. Onwards I charged, remembering the looks on the faces of my fallen men. We made a break to the glistering gold centre, where Queen Helen of Sparta was undoubtedly being held. We busted down the door, few of us remaining, killing all those who opposed us. We painted the walls and floors with the blood of those willing to steal from glorious Sparta. We headed down a long winding staircase we thought led to hell. Indeed it did, entering a fiery chamber with hellish cobblestone walls. There in the centre of this abyss, lay a cage made of titanium forged from the blacksmiths of Delphi. Inside this cage lay the Helen, chained limb to limb. My heart and strength became one against the vastly constructed legions of Troy. When suddenly there was a roar from the stairs. 4 Spartans appeared, loyal till the end. They ran us down like a pack of wild dogs, but the mighty men from Ithaca never gave up. We fought till the very end. Severed limbs and heads lay on the floor. Queen Helen was free of the foul prison that held her against her will. A glorious victory, the 4 courageous men, Egon, Dromius, Creon, and Gallus, at my side, ready for the journey that lay ahead. We turned ready to fight the mighty Cyclops together. Nightfall brought him back, herding his woolly sheep, and he quickly drove his sleek flock into the vaulted cavern, rams and all, none left outside in the walled yard.
Thank you. A different type of poem, but still very dramatic. So, Gabe, can you tell us what did you like about studying Homer?
I found it really difficult to write a poem in the style of Homer because I never knew how writing poetry before in a symbolic way. However, I continued to write, the struggle became easier, and I began to really enjoy the process. Writing about going down to the underworld and bringing Helen back up made me understand how heroes take risks to save other people. After I completed writing my poem, I performed it in front of my classmates. They all enjoyed listening, and I liked the feeling of performing heroic poetry. I believe that learning about Homer is very important as it teaches us the style and language of poets who wrote centuries ago, but the human journey is still relevant today. Every week on the news you see lots of modern-day Helens find themselves victims of men's behaviour, and it's up to us to find the hero within to help them. I'm very happy that I studied Homer's poem and came out with an epic poem of my own. And now I'm studying, and now I understand a little bit more about how people have not changed much throughout the centuries.
So with that, Gabe's unaware of this. So we'd like to announce you as the 2018 winner of the poetry competition.
Fantastic poetry, and for coming here today. Here, I'd like to present you with $150 from Humanity 21.
So Humanities 21 Schools Division looks forward to judging the 2019 competition. If you're interested, all the details are on the website, and we look forward to having more young people involved with Homer. So I'll hand back to Maeve now. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabe and Jasmine, for that fantastic insight into how we can still find relevance within these ancient works. I thought that was just fantastic, and yeah, I do look forward to reading the entries next year. I'm going to pass back to Jeff, who I think will lead us through the voting, or perhaps I can just invite people to come up.
Thanks, mate. Well, happy to be handed back to. Look, we're pretty much done, but before we finish, could you all please, could we vote another round of applause for our 4 And a round of applause for yourselves for coming along and making it such a great day. Thank you all for coming. Thank you to our marvellous panel. On your way out, make your way past the urners and cast your Ostraki into the urn of your choice. And
Sorry, I'm just going to cut you off, Jeff. We want people to stay because we want to announce the winner. So come up, just throw it in, and then go back to
you want people to come forward,
yes,
cast their Ostraki and go back to their seat. Okay, well, in that case, we need a bit of liturgical organisation. If we're going to do that, could we do it starting with the back row, and we'll do it a row at a time? So much for the secret ballot.
Now, while people are coming up to vote, and come on, everybody. Make your way down. I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about Humanities 21.
Corruption is okay.
Don't listen to Reese.
Corruption is okay.
So look, the Festival of Hunger is just one of the activities that we do throughout the year. Humanities 21 is an organisation that advocates for the importance of the humanities in our world today and always. And I think the Jasmine and Gabe, who you've just seen reading to you these fantastic poems, are really emblems of how important it is that people value the humanities continuously. So, look, we are a not-for-profit organisation, which means we depend on the support of our members, largely to continue our advocacy efforts. So if you've enjoyed yourself today, sorry, can I just give your attention, please? Enough talking, you can talk after. If you've enjoyed yourself today, I invite you to look on our website and consider becoming a member. Our memberships are inexpensive, starting from $40 for a year. During that year, you will get a discount on your tickets to all of our events, and you will also know that you're supporting us in making events like this possible. Now, with that in mind, I would like to thank the Hellenic Museum for being our supporters and making this possible through giving us a wonderful venue. And also to the Department of Premier and Cabinet, who gave us a grant through their Multicultural Festivals and Events program, and that's also helped us to make this possible. So one more thing I want to highlight is that as you walk out today, you'll see that there are some raffle tickets on sale. We are raffling off Emily Wilson's translation of Homer's Odyssey, as well as a $100 voucher to Hellenic Republic, the fantastic Greek restaurant in Melbourne. So if you like Greek food and you want to read Emily's book, or perhaps you have read it and you'd like your own copy, you can purchase some raffle tickets on your way out. It's one for $5 and three for $10. And I think that about sums me up. Become a Humanities 21 member, and thank you for coming to the Festival of Homer.
Thank you, Maeve. We've got this wonderful modern thing of urns that we can actually see through, so we don't have to empty them out and count them, nor do we need to weigh them in hand. But we could weigh them, we could count them, or we could just look at them. I think even given the uneven size of the Ostraki, I think they average out over the numbers, and I'm giving it by the narrowest of margins to the Achilles is a hero side. Thank you so much, everybody. I'm sure all our speakers will be more than happy to continue the conversation.